Hi, everyone. We are so happy to have you here. We will be getting started in just a moment. I'm just going to give all of our participants a little bit of time to filter in, and we will get started in just a moment. Um, while we're waiting to get started, feel free to put in the chat, introduce yourself, talk a little bit about what business you're thinking of starting or what business you're already in. And that way we can sort of get to know our peers, and we will get started in just a moment. If you're just joining us, we are going to get started in just a moment, just giving our attendees a little bit more time to filter in before we get started. But please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, talk a little bit about your business or your ideas, and we'll get started in just a few moments. All right, welcome everyone. Yes, I see some activity in the chat. Please keep it up. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome. My name is Rachel, and I am the marketing and communications person here at the Temple Small Business Development Center. The Temple SBDC helps small businesses start, grow, and succeed. We do this through our no-cost consulting and a variety of no-cost webinars and training programs like the one that you are attending today. You are joining us for Business 102. This webinar is part of our Startup Essentials program, which is designed to help you understand the basics of starting a business. Our regularly scheduled sessions will help you gain the skills you need to succeed and avoid mistakes. You'll receive more information about upcoming webinars in this program and some of our other webinars coming up in a follow-up after this webinar. We are recording today's session, and a copy of that recording and today's PowerPoint will be sent to all of you within a few days in a follow-up email. All of our attendees have been muted, but we encourage you to post any questions you have in the Q&A, and we'll be answering them as they come in. I am now going to turn the floor over to Isabel.
Hello, everybody. I almost said good morning, but it's just afternoon now. Thanks for joining us this Monday for Starting a Business 102 from Idea to Launch. If you weren't here last week, we'll do a quick recap. This is a second in a two-parter that we offer every single month. So if you missed 101, you can catch it next month in April. So as you heard from Rachel, here's a little bit about the SBDC and our services. We aim to be a place where all members of our small business community can grow, develop, and thrive. And so it's a little bit more about the work that we do. We have small business consulting, and we'll review at the end how you can connect with a small business consultant if you haven't already done so. We also have a number of training classes as well as other resources. Here's a little bit about me. I've been working with small businesses for about a decade, yep, a little bit more about my work. Here's who I am talking to you today. Our agenda for today, we're going to review really quickly the business concept worksheet that we worked on in last Monday's webinar, Starting a Business 101. Preparing to launch, and then we will talk about the value of a business plan, how to turn that business concept worksheet into that business plan. We'll talk more about financing options, how to get some, how businesses get the money that they need to actually launch, and then we'll follow up with more info about how to connect with the SBDC, what your kind of next steps are after this webinar. I'm going to launch a quick poll. I'm interested to know in the room, how many of us are already operational, meaning that we are in business, we're making sales, we've got clients or customers, things are off and running. No wrong answers here. A business plan is valuable for folks, even if you've been in business for a year or two. If you kind of started without a plan and you're ready to come back and kind of get that, put some structure in place, get it, be a little bit more focused in your business as you start to grow. But it's also, of course, valuable for, pre-venture and startup businesses as well. So a little bit more about just helping me kind of understand who's in the room. That'll help me, as I'm presenting today. All right, so most of us have participated. Give it about 10 more seconds, going once, going twice. All right, I'm going to close this poll. It looks like most of us are already still planning or are in the process of starting. So a couple folks are already operational, but that's really helpful to know. So thank you all for participating in that poll. And we're going to start talking today about a quick recap of 101. So if you remember this business concept worksheet, this was the kind of work product from last week. You probably got a copy of this in our follow-up email, but it's just a quick, like, one-page tool to lay out all of the different elements of your business concept so that you can, for instance, compare more than one business concept so that you can quickly at a glance identify parts of the concept that you might need to tighten up, refine, do a little more research or education about. And it's also a great tool if you're intimidated by writing the full business plan. This is a great way to kind of start off with something that is less writing heavy, right? The business concept worksheet is typically bullet points. So if this doesn't look familiar and you didn't come to last week, no worries. You don't need to do this first. It's just a really helpful, it's a helpful kind of first way in. It looks like somebody didn't attend last week. I can go ahead and drop this file into the chat, but you can also find, you can also get, I don't think we post the recording from this one on our YouTube channel the way that we do with our other webinars, because we offer it every single month, so frequently. But I am going to drop that PDF into the chat. So if you're curious about this one, you can find it there. We also have an instructions sheet. So I'm including that file as well. Again, you don't need to go through the business concept worksheet. It's just a useful kind of stepping stone to the full plan. So from here, I'm going to move on and we're going to talk about that full formal business plan. So I'm going to do one more poll if you'll be patient with me, and I'd love to just know what our goals are for the business plan. People write plans for different reasons. It could be, I'm not sure what my goals are yet. It could be we're writing this primarily for yourself to ensure that your business will be sustainable. Could be primarily for a funder as part of a business loan application. Could be a little bit of both. People write plans for different reasons, but it's helpful to know, is it who the audience for the plan is as you begin to write it, so that you can, tailor certain portions of it to that reader. So, and we'll talk about how to do that and why to do that as we move along. All right, so we're at pretty close to full participation, which I love to see. I'm going to go ahead and give it, going once, going twice, and then I'm going to close up our poll. And if you're curious, most of us know why we're writing it. We're writing it either primarily for ourselves or for both ourselves and a funder. So it's good to know. No one's like, it's just for a lender. I don't need it, which is really great. Because in our opinion, a business plan is a really important step for all businesses. So for instance, so why are you writing your plan? It could be to prove that you have a good business model. It's a great reason, right? To make sure that you are going to make money from the business, that you have a business model that has that you have a good understanding of your customer, that you have a good understanding of your value proposition to that customer, that you understand the kind of competitive landscape, who you're competing with and how you're competing, so that your business, that your business model is workable. Could be that you're writing your business plan to prove that you have all of the necessary expertise and connections to run it. And if you discover that you don't, a business plan is a great way to identify, the traits that you want to go look for in a business partner or a key manager, that whoever that kind of second person in the business is going to be. If you don't have all the pieces yourself, who are you looking for? It could be, in the business planning process, you discover, okay, I really understand the needs of my customer here, but I don't have the expertise in maybe the product development side, or I don't have the connections with like a manufacturer. So I'm going to go find a business partner or an advisor or a mentor who can help me better understand that piece of it. So that's another reason that a business plan can be useful. It could be that you're writing a plan to demonstrate profit potential. That's a really good reason to write a business plan. How, am I going to make money, right? So a great question for a business plan is, exploring the size of the market, the price tolerance of that market, the profit margin of your product or service, and you can use those figures to go to along with your startup budget to prove that your business will has the potential to be profitable. And often people come to us because they're right. They approached a lender looking for a business loan, and the lender said, "Do you have a business plan?" And no, okay, go talk to the Small Business Development Center. They can help. If that's you, welcome to you as well. A business plan is often a part of a business loan application, especially if you're applying for a loan in the first 3 years of your business. It's a required document, and you'll talk about the kind of the slight difference in the way that you write your plan for a lender versus just for yourself. Is you want to, if you're writing for a lender, talk about your financing needs, how any other funds that are going to be used to start the business, and then you want to emphasize the profitability of the business as you're writing the plan. And kind of remember that you might be writing for somebody who does not understand your industry. They may not have any background in what you're doing, so you may have to be a little bit more comprehensive in some of your your product service description or your industry research than you would be perhaps otherwise if you were just writing for yourself. So it's helpful to know who your audience is, and that's why we kind of start off with that question. Rachel said this, but I'm going to reiterate it. If you have questions as we go along, please don't keep them to yourself. You never know who else has a question that is just feeling a little bit shy to ask it. You can ask questions in the Q&A. You can put them in the chat. I will likely see them either place. The Q&A is very helpful because that way everybody else can see your questions and the answers as well. But definitely as we're going along, feel free to ask questions. If you prefer to ask a question anonymously, you can do so in with the Q&A function. But yeah, I love the engagement in the chat. I love to see that. It helps me not feel as though I'm talking to myself here over Zoom. So our next we're going to talk about the specific. We're going to talk about the plan itself, and we're going to actually go through a specific business plan template. And for each section, we're going to go section by section. For each section, I'm going to talk about the essential components of that section, what goes there. I'm going to talk about where in your one-page business concept worksheet you can find some of that content, what else you might need to go and kind of go and include, write out or go research. And then we'll actually see a kind of an example of that from the same coffee shop business that we worked with last week, the coffee shop, Joe's Coffee Shop. So the business plan template has been shared in the chat. It's a .doc file. And if you'll notice, it has kind of instructions, then it has a place where you can actually do the writing. And the way that it's designed is that you would write up your content and then delete the instructions, which is this. The instructions are this kind of green portion. And then in the file, there's like a section, below this where you can type in, and it looks like, regular font. But so business plans typically begin with a company summary, and you do not need to. The typical very first section of a business plan is the executive summary. We typically leave the executive summary until last, and as we're writing a business plan, and that's because it is really tailored to the specific reader. Often the executive summary, if you're submitting the plan for a loan, the executive summary will recap, the loan amount, the use of funds, the nature of the business, the profit potential over the next 3 years. It'll really give high level, very important details for a lender. So often when we're writing the plan, we might not have those details yet. So it doesn't make sense to start with that executive summary. So the first section of the kind of body of your plan is this company summary. You're going to cover some key items here, including your history of the business, If you are already existing, your the data establishment, you'll talk about the business purpose, what you do or sell, what your business activities are in the business, and the business location. It's important to include that as well. If you're located in a particular neighborhood or a particular part of a particular, geographic location. If you're writing this for a lender, lenders often have, particular geographic interests, based on the branch they work out of, or the focus of their nonprofit lender, or the focus of their nonprofit or their funders. So don't forget to include the location there. This section does pull from the what section of your one-page business plan. So this is the really quick kind of explanation of who you are. This is typically not a terribly long section because there are places later on in the plan to go into more detail about your product or service. So here you're just kind of introducing yourself. Here's an example of the company summary for Joe and Jane. And just so you know, to save everybody's kind of eyes from fatigue here, we did not include a full, we didn't write this in full kind of paragraph prose form, which you typically would do in a plan. A plan would typically not be in bullet point format, but because we're it's a PowerPoint, I don't want to make everybody read the full paragraphs here. We did put it in bullet point format. I think there's one section where we wrote it out in paragraph form just to give you a sense of the length, but for the most part, it's going to be bullet points. When you write your plan, it would probably not be bullet points unless you're just writing it for yourself, and that's what works for you. Let's see. I got a question in the Q&A here. Let's say I have a CFO who wants to bring onto my team, but part of the reason I need the plan is to get funding to pay for him. Does he go into personnel or elsewhere? So we'll talk about that, but that would go under probably management. A CFO is a key manager, so you would probably put that person under the management section of your plan. Yeah, definitely. And you would also maybe discuss that funding need in your use of funds section, which is at the very end of the plan. And depending on, the scope of that loan request and how much of it was, going to be set aside for this person's payroll and how critical they were to the business, you might include that in your executive summary as well. But that's, a little bit more of a strategic decision based on, everything else that you're looking for with that loan request. So yeah, keep those questions coming. So Joe and Jane have a coffee shop. This is Joe's Coffee Shop is the name of it. They're located in Northern Liberties. So you got that geographic location. Here's what they do. They specialize in serving coffee brewed with beans sourced from roasters within 10 miles of the store. They have state-of-the-art brewing technology. Those are their kind of key highlights about their business. There's no history of the business here because this is a brand new venture. So in your plan, you would probably say, Joe's Coffee Shop is a startup business plan located in, again, because we didn't make this the full paragraph format. We left those kind of intro words off, but you would include them, you would include them in your plan. So that's the company summary. After the company summary section in the template is the company ownership and legal structure section. This is, again, another quickie. You're really focusing on just the facts here. Legal structure and the business ownership. So literally just owners, not, key managers. So you would put, for instance, for Joe and Jane. Joe and Jane are the co-owners of Joe's Coffee Shop, which is an LLC formed in the state of Pennsylvania. Jane will own 60% of the business. Joe will own the other 40. There's your Joe and Jane's Coffee Shop. And you can see, again, these early sections are quick, just dropping the facts. There will be plenty of room to talk about everybody's expertise and background in the future sections. So for instance, in the very next section is the management team. This is where the question asker would put information about that CFO. So here is the part where you're going to lay out all of the key people in your business. And how you define key people or key managers is up to you. It depends on the business, right? Some people define key managers as really just the kind of C-suite in the business, who's the kind of the CEO, the CFO, the COO, who's in charge of running things, who's in charge of paying for things, who's in charge of making sure things run smoothly. But whoever the kind of key essential people are in your business, you want to outline their responsibilities and their backgrounds. So if you're writing for a lender, you can really make it clear to them that you understand the expertise that your business needs to run successfully, and you have that expertise in the business already. You may choose, if you see big gaps in that expertise, you may choose to talk about outside professionals, right? If nobody in your business has bookkeeping, record keeping, or administrative experience, you may talk about how you have an accountant already secured and ready to work with your business. So this is if you're writing this for a lender, it is important to talk about the expertise that your various managers have in the business. And if you're talking about yourself, and this is maybe a business that you haven't, a kind of business you haven't run before, you might talk about indirect experience that provided transferable skills to you. So if you're running a if you're opening a brand new, e-commerce business, but you haven't ever, run an e-commerce business before, but you have personal experience in digital marketing, that is very transferable, and you should talk about your digital marketing background, right? So definitely talk about all those places. There's two questions here. I want to take them. The first in the Q&A: how important is the management team to how seriously you'll be taken? I'm thinking about how, Elizabeth Holmes basically skated based on who was supporting her. As you can see from that example of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, it really, your management team can be very, very important to making you be taken seriously by investors or by lenders. So definitely, critical, I would say. Important. That is to, now following up on that, the next question I have here in the chat is, what if you need people with certain expertise, but you don't know who they are yet? That's such a good question, because so often you're starting a business and you need somebody with expertise in direct sales, or somebody with expertise in marketing, and you don't have those people yet. You can say, another key manager is going to be our director of marketing, and we have a job description and we have a salary in mind, and as soon as we obtain funding for for a startup process, we'll begin recruiting for that role. But you can talk about, this is the kind of person we would be looking for to fill this kind of role. That can absolutely go into the management team section. All right, great. One other question. I just filed for an LLC. What is the difference between being a CEO, president, or owner? They're all different words for who's the highest title in the business. The highest title is defined in your business's governing document. So for an LLC, that's your operating agreement. For a corporation, it would be your bylaws. Owner is just sort of a standard word for people who have ownership of a business, be that stockholders for a corporation, members for an LLC, or the sole proprietor of a proprietorship. President and CEO, different corporations define highest title differently. Some have president as reporting to the CEO, others have CEOs reporting to president. So the highest title there would depend on how the bylaws are written. But CEO is chief executive officer. President, is a term we all use for kind of the head honcho in charge. They are often used interchangeably. The great news is, if it's your business, you can decide what your title is and you can define it how you like. So if you have an LLC, you can absolutely have, you can call yourself owner or founder or CEO or, whatever you like, as long as, that you're the only thing to be aware of is, if you have a business partner and who has a kind of a competing highest title, you want to be clear on what your bylaws say as far as who's really, how decisions are made and who has what authority. But great question. One more question. If you're doing it all yourself at first, like selling online, would a bank be less likely to give you a loan because of that reason? We'll talk about financing at the end, but that would probably not be the biggest concern a bank would have. If you're able to handle all of it yourself, you have the right background, the work isn't, you're making the case that you've got vendors taking care of certain pieces of it, that wouldn't be necessarily the concern that a bank would have, as long as your plan shows that you have you have a good handle on your market, how you're going to be reaching people, your products are going to come from and how they're going to be shipped out. As long as you have all of the pieces under control, you doing them yourself isn't a concern necessarily. But lenders do have other concerns, and we'll talk about those in the very next kind of, after we finish the business plan. That's the next thing we're going to talk about, is financing, for sure. So I know a lot of us are interested in financing. So let's move on from management team. So this is the example of the management team section for Joe and Jane. This one we wrote out long form, just to give you a sense, because this is also a relatively short section. So this one is the long form version. It is rather long form, so I'm gonna not necessarily read through it. Great question in the chat here. Using loan to hire sales professionals for business takeoff is recommended, or the business needs to have a minimum business income before starting hiring. So it can, it depends, right? It's a good idea to have a few months of payroll in reserve as working capital, whether that's from a loan or from an owner investment. Before you hire someone, you want to know that you'll be able to pay them. It typically takes a period of time for anybody, even a sales professional, to kind of pay for themselves through their work. Although that's obviously the goal when you're hiring somebody, is that they're going to do work that will generate revenue, that will pay for their own salary. But it depends on the specifics of your case. But yeah, you do want to have, you want to have some confidence that you'll make payroll before you hire somebody, for sure. And sometimes that means that you're going to obtain a loan or look at a line of credit or something to make sure that you have that working capital. Question: is the class being recorded? It is being recorded. We do have a YouTube page. This recording will not go on the YouTube page because we offer this class every single month. So we would have, a YouTube page would have nothing but these if we put all the recordings up. But we are recording it, and I believe the recording will be sent out in the follow-up email. So great question. The YouTube page, I'm going to ask Rachel to find that link and send it when she gets back. If she's not here, I'll ask her to find that YouTube link, just so I can continue and through the presentation and keep us in a timely way. But you can also, if you search Temple SBDC YouTube, it comes right up. So next up, after the company summary, is the product service description. So this section is where you get to go a little bit more in depth about what your business actually sells, be that products or services. And your goal is to describe the product or service. If you recall from our last class, we described the product or service as the solution to a specific customer need. So we want to talk about the thing we're selling, be it product or service. We want to talk about the marketplace need that the product is meeting. We want to talk about the benefits that your customer gets from the product or service, maybe some unique features, a little bit of the product life cycle. How do you make it? How do you buy it? Where is it coming from? If it's a product, if you're selling a product online, where is it being manufactured? How is it being shipped to you? Are you doing the fulfillment piece or somebody else? Thank you, Rachel. There's the link to the YouTube page in the chat. Are you doing your own fulfillment, packaging and shipping orders, or are you going to be contracting that out to somebody? Are you doing your own warehousing? Kind of what is that kind of product or life cycle? If you have a product-based business, if you have a service-based business, what does your sales process look like? So all of that kind of goes here in the product or service section. And then any of these, if they apply, intellectual property concerns, your R&D process, where you are in that research and development process, and then any additional revenue streams for the business, because your business may have more than one revenue stream. If your business does have more than one way of making money, more than one revenue stream, you might have kind of everything about this one revenue stream, and then new section, everything about the next revenue stream, and the new section. So you're kind of talking about all these different topics split up into the number of revenue streams that your business has. I hope that makes sense. Remember, as you're writing this, if you're writing this for a lender, that lender may not know anything about what your business does, right? If you have a business that is, if you're starting a childcare business, and you're looking for a startup loan, your lender may be, somebody who has never had a child in childcare, who knows nothing about the industry. So you may be, you may need to kind of refocus and be on the lookout for any industry specific jargon that you might be using and kind of explain it as you go. But yeah, this is what goes in. And I'll show you the example of the product or service description for Joe and Jane. This section will also include details on your revenue streams and costs, but we're going to put a pin in the revenue streams and costs question and revisit them after doing some industry and market research. Unless you have pricing cost information right now, include it if you got it, but that often may need to come after doing some additional research and into your competitors and identify and some additional research into your vendors. Question in the chat: I've seen a bunch of people with service-based businesses create, quote, patented processes. Is this because they actually plan to sue people for stealing it? Is it more about appearing legit to customers? It's a great question. I don't have a patented process, so I can't speak to what their motivation is. But I would say probably it could be a little a column A, a little a column B, right? I think people do feel that there's some legitimacy to having a quote unquote patented process. But yeah, patents are kind of hard to get. They're expensive. So I don't think people generally do a patent just for the sake of kind of marketing purposes. I think people do patent processes because they want to protect them in some way. But again, I don't have one, so I can't speak to what the motivation might be. Another question, how do you know the elements of your product's life cycle if you don't know them yet? So that's true for all the different parts of this plan. The plan isn't complete until you know them. So you have to, you have a product that needs to be manufactured. So you can say, this is where we are in the research and development process. We have created the design of a prototype, and we're looking around for a manufacturer that can handle, that can go through, prototyping, the prototyping process with us. Or it could be, I have a product that I have a working prototype for, and I'm looking for a manufacturer that can handle the initial order. You can kind of write about the plan being wherever, in whatever stage you're in. But you may need to come back and revisit the plan once you have a better sense of that product life cycle. You certainly will be, it will be challenging to create financial projections based on a manufacturing process that is still up in the air. So you can do research into the business plans for other similar products and look at what their manufacturing costs are and use those numbers as placeholders in your financials. But you're going to be doing, we talk about a lot of the money side of a business plan as being kind of educated guesswork. Yours is going to be a little bit more guess and a little bit less educated than other folks, but that's still what you're doing. You're going to go find benchmarks or comparables, try to find out as much as you can about those other product manufacturers, what their costs and processes are, and include that information in your plan to the best of your abilities. Yeah, but that was a great question. So this is Joe's product services description. Joe and Jane sell single cups of coffee brewed in the store. They offer a range of ways that coffee is brewed. They've got drip machine, pour over, Chemex, other methods. And there'll be 2 different types of beans, a light roast and a dark roast. They've got decaf coffees. That's all the details on their products or service, on their single cups of coffee. They also have a separate revenue stream for coffee boxes. They'll sell coffee boxes in bulk to local businesses. And there's more details about the order process, what comes with that order, requirements for timing of that order, how they're brewed, how they're delivered. And so you get a sense of really, all the ways that product works. Question in the chat, product and services in my business is taking a few pages. Will that be boring for investors to read? You may want to break that up into multiple sections, as long as you have good, good like visual cues to help a reader move through that. I think that would be okay. As with everything at this stage of the business plan, if you're putting a draft together, you can send it over to your business plan, to your individual consultant. In your case, I happen to know that that's me. Send it to me. We'll take a look at it, and we'll share specific feedback about your specific plan with you, as far as length, readability, any content that might need to be missing, that might need to be updated, or researched a little more closely. So yeah, I think typically a product or services section is not super long. It is one of the kind of core parts of your plan, but you're typically looking at like a page or two kind of max. But for a more technical business, you might need more in there. It could be that some of that content could be moved to a technical appendix where you have a full description of the the kind of the technical specs of your product or service. That can be one way to kind of move some of that bulk out of there and put it elsewhere, just to improve readability. But it just depends. So I'm going to move on. Oh, one more question here in the chat about business plans. Do I need a complete business plan to get in front of a lender, for example, the event tomorrow night? I think you mean the SBDC Day event on the 15th, which includes pitching. So you would not necessarily need a full business plan. You would need a pitch, which has a lot of the same components, but is a PowerPoint, usually a slide deck and a script, as opposed to being a written full document. To move forward with a lender, you typically would need the full business plan, and certainly to be assigned to a primary consultant here at the SBDC, you need a full plan. But to pitch, all you need is a pitch deck. But if you want to move forward with a lender, you would need that full plan. We'll talk about revenue models next. Question in the chat: are there any pitch materials available to review? So we do have a class that we offer that's specifically on how to pitch your business. You can check our calendar of events for the next dates for that, but we do have a class specifically on how to pitch. We offer that throughout the year, and then I think twice a year we have pitch events where people who come to that how to pitch class can actually come and deliver their pitch live and get feedback on it. So check the calendar of events for that. Or reach out to your individual consultant to talk about how to pull a pitch together if there's not a class coming up in timely enough, in a timeline that works for your needs. So revenue models, I'm going to keep us moving because I want to be sensitive to time here. Revenue models. So this is going to be a section that expands on the revenue streams section of your one pager. If you remember this revenue streams diagram, these last two pieces are still part of your product services section. This is the revenue stream section, including as much detail as you know it. If you know pricing structure, subscriptions, discounts, all that stuff. These are some examples of different revenue models. We've got manufacturing, which is where you are making the product yourself and typically selling it wholesale to distributors, or selling it direct to consumer as well. You've got wholesale, which is where you sell your products to other businesses. Retail, where you sell your products directly to consumers. The main difference there is that retail businesses charge sales tax, and wholesale businesses typically don't charge the full retail price for their products, and they typically have minimum order sizes. Subscription models, which you may be familiar with, which is where you deliver a set amount of your product or service in a given time frame in exchange for a consistent revenue stream from your customer. Your customer signs up to pay, $10 a month or whatever to get something from you at the same time every single month. That can be a great way to ensure steady cash flow to your business. And kind of know exactly how, have a predictable amount of revenue coming in and kind of sales going out. It doesn't work for every business, but it's a cool approach. Sales of service, of course, if you're selling a service as opposed to a product, the services can be kind of priced, and the pricing structure can work in different ways for service sales. Sales of advertising, that's a revenue model where you're publishing content and charging for advertising space on that content. Freemium is the revenue model where you have a lot, where you've got a platform that is free to use unless you want to use premium features, and then those premium features come at a cost. It's how we all use, Twitter is now a freemium model because the blue check, you have to pay some money to get a blue check. There's freemium, Canva is a freemium service. I'm sure you can think of others. So those are some different revenue models. I see the question in the chat. I'm gonna get to it in 1 second. Joe's revenue model is this. This is his revenue model section. He has 2 different revenue streams: the sales of cups of coffee and bulk coffee orders. There'll be different prices for each brewing method. The sales of cups of coffee will represent 70% of the revenue of the shop in years 1 and 2, and bulk orders will be the other 25% of the shop's revenue. Those are those box of Joes. And the goal is to expand the number of business accounts to be 50% of the shop's revenue by year 5. And there's a little bit more about the kind of payment process there. So the revenue model, you can see here, he's got what it's going to look like year 1 and what it's going to look like kind of down the road. He's got the beginnings of some plans for some future plans included in the revenue model section. And this speaks to the question that there is in the Q&A. Do you recommend planning out the entire ecosystem of your business at the outset, or is it best to make the primary plan first and allow it to evolve? I would say it's good to talk about what's currently true and what your vision is in the plan. I would say don't make yourself crazy planning out more than about 3 years in the future. Have a vision, of course, but if you're talking about by year 7, we're going to be providing, 15 workshops a year or 1,500 workshops a year. Your plan is generally going to become less reliable over time. That's just the nature of, none of us can tell the future. So we typically would look at your first year or 2, those plans can be pretty concrete. Your milestones can be pretty concrete. You're generally, if your plan is based on solid research and understanding, you're going to, meet those things. Year 3 is a little fuzzier. Years 4 and 5, much less clear. But if you have long-term objectives, there's no harm in mentioning them, especially if they relate to your pricing or your, how you're going to meet the needs of your target customer base. Hope that made sense. The answer is kind of, not to, it depends again, but that it really is the answer, that it does depend. Next up, we're going to talk about startup budgeting. So startup budgeting, the goal of startup budgeting is to ensure that you have enough funds to establish the business, right? This is really critically important. And we're going through the plan in order, but you don't always necessarily write it in order. Sometimes you don't have your pricing, in order to do a startup budget, you have to know quite a lot about how your business works. It could be that you're going to move through and start with the industry research and competitive analysis section first. And that's where you that's the low-hanging fruit for you, which is totally fine. We're just going through this top to bottom, but as you begin to write it, you can read through and start with a section that you have the most to say in. So startup budgeting is the process of figuring out how much money you need to actually get off the ground and begin generating revenue. The goals for startup budgeting would be to ensure that enough funds are available to establish the business, to verify the financial feasibility of the business model, make sure that you're not going to run out of cash in the early days before you can start really making money, earning revenue. And you're going to set goals for raising any necessary external financing before you actually start that process. In order to do this, you need to have 2 things. I say 2 things, but it's, each of these 2 things is kind of its own process. You need to have estimates of all expenses that you're going to have before launch, and you need to have estimates of your first 3 to 6 months of operating expenses. So if you need to do more industry research, if you need to do more competitive analysis before you have these foundations, pause, come back, right? But here's an example of the startup budgeting, this kind of startup budget lists for Joe. So Joe has his startup budgets is kind of divided up into facilities requirements and other stuff. So facilities requirements for Joe, it's a brick and mortar coffee shop. He needs a lease deposit. He needs renovations for the brick and mortar location. He needs furniture. He needs front of house equipment, starting inventory, office furniture, computers, any other kind of miscellaneous technology, security cameras, smart locks. And all of these would have, ideally, they would have dollar amounts next to them, right? So it would be like lease deposit, $600 or $2,500, renovations, and then like a very broad estimate of what the renovations would be, furniture, and you would have a dollar amount, right? So you need to have the specific dollar amounts for each of these items in order to really begin to understand how much money you need to start your business. The other requirements section would be things like professional services costs, marketing, insurance. It's a good idea, as we talked about, to have a few months of operating expenses. So for Joe, that's inventory and payroll. Again, before you hire somebody, you want to make sure that you can pay them. So that's his, and we'll talk in a second about his kind of startup budget and what that's going to mean for his financing process. Joe also needs to know what his operating expenses really are. So here's some operating expenses. We typically divide operating expenses into fixed and variable costs. Fixed costs are the ones that don't change. They're the same no matter what. Variable costs vary with the amount of sales that you have. So for instance, the classic fixed cost, rent, insurance can be a fixed cost. Variable costs that vary with the number of sales that you do might be, for Joe, inventory, right? And the number of paper cups that he needs will be dependent on the number of coffees that he sells. So here are some of his costs. And he's got rent, payroll, inventory, marketing, utilities, insurance, software and technologies, professional services, and he's split out those specifics into some examples. So again, all of these ideally would have numbers next to them for how much he's going to spend on these things per month. So that's his startup budget. We're going to come back to this at the end when we talk about Joe's financing needs, but this would go into the revenue model section of your plan. So that's why we're talking about it here, even though for a lot of folks, this is something that you don't really start doing until you have a more complete plan, because you just don't have a sense of the specifics that you need to create this budget. Next up is your industry market analysis section. So this is really about positioning your business within a larger context. And that larger context could be, your larger, the trends within your industry, what's going on in your specific geographical market. If you're going to be providing a specific service and you're targeting, your customers for that service are going to be within you're focusing on customers within, a specific neighborhood in Philadelphia, or within, the tri-state area or whatever. You want to have all of those, you want to be upfront about all of those parameters. So this is a great question in the chat that we're definitely going to talk about. So you want to include any industry trends or forecasts that you've come across. And this is definitely a place where you can go, where this is often when clients come to us with business plan drafts, they're like, this is the section I didn't know what to do with. And there are some great industry resources and databases to find out, where to pull numbers from. But let me show you what Joe and Jane's industry market analysis section looks like, and then I'll answer the question in the chat about it. So Joe's coffee shop, this is the market analysis section. So Joe talked about, coffee is consumed by more than, by the way, the numbers and things in this one, as an example, we made them up. You can find this real research. We did not look for it. We made it up, but so coffee is consumed by over 50% of Americans on a daily basis. That's something you could probably find a real number for, like looking on Google Scholar. Since the mid-90s, coffee has become an increasingly refined product, with customers wanting higher quality and more varied options. Again, we've made that up. Maybe you would pull that from like an industry publication or, an academic paper. This number, in 2005, there was just one independent coffee roaster, and by 2019, there's 10 just within the city of Philadelphia. That you can find out. There are business databases all over the place. The Free Library of Philadelphia has some, and you can pull historical business records from that. So that's where you would, if you were going to go find real numbers, that's where you would go for those kinds of real numbers. And then this last piece is just Joe's, Joe's an industry expert. So this is Joe's industry expert opinion. Over the past 10 years, several new brewing technologies have come on the market and discerning customers have preferences. So this is kind of, again, this is just bullet points in a real industry market analysis section. This would be a little bit longer, but you would pull some of these pieces from there. And this is the introduction to the industry and market analysis section. So this is the stuff that's about, big picture trends, what's going on nationally, what's going on locally. You can often, I'm going to answer the questions that are here. How do you find info about industry trends? So in some cases, if you are an expert in your industry, you can draw your own conclusions and rather than citing a source, say like, based on the owner's 35 years of experience in this industry, we found X, Y, and Z. That's a very credible source. You can also say, a recent publication in Industry Magazine said X, Y, Z, or you can pull an industry report from one of the business databases at the free library, or you can talk to us to pull an industry research report. Those industry research reports are typically quite broad. They're usually like national in scope, so it's not as applicable to your specific area if you're going to be focusing super locally, but it's a start. You can, but yeah, how do you know that you have enough? Yeah, you can really go down a rabbit hole here. And basically, you're building a case to a lender, right? You're building a case that there's an opportunity for your business, that that there's a market for your product or service, and that you understand that industry and that market. So you stop when you feel like you've made that case well. And if you feel like you don't have enough, that's a great reason to reach out to an SBDC consultant. If you feel like you have so much and your customers are going to drown in it, it's another reason to reach out. We can definitely work with you on kind of knowing how much is too much, how much is enough. We're going to talk about the competitors. We're going to talk about the competitors in the very next slide. So I will come back to you on that, but it's a good question, and I will definitely not forget that. Question in the chat: what resources are used online to research or follow trends of your particular industry? It depends on your particular industry. I work with clients in industries as different as e-commerce, childcare, STEM consulting, manufacturing, financial services. It just super depends on your specific industry. A great place to start would be to Google keywords related to your industry, followed by the name, publication or professional association, and see what comes out. But yeah, you definitely, Google Scholar, if you're not sure where else to start, Google Scholar is a good resource for finding somewhat more credible peer-reviewed articles. But yeah, you definitely need to know your industry better than, I'm just some girl, right? I'm just some lady. You want to know your industry better than just some lady on the internet. I do have a background in some specific industries. I could tell you what would be the right periodical for, certain industries, but for yours, you want to be the expert in your industry of the two of us. So, let the internet guide you. If you find something that you want to follow up on, do a little bit more research. There's a lot that you can find there. I can't, we do have on our resources page some specific periodicals that are kind of general business information, but that's a great question for a librarian, actually, that over at the Free Library of Philadelphia or your local library, if you're not sure where to start. Let's talk about competitive analysis. We talked in the last class about the different kinds of competition, that there's direct and indirect, and that both matter, right? That you're competing with anybody who solves your customer's problem, even if they're solving it in a slightly different way from yours. The competitive analysis is where you talk about how your business is positioned in a relationship to those other solutions, or those other competitors. So you're going to pull from the existing alternative section of your one pager, and you're going to be, if you have, there's a great question in the chat: how many competitors is too many? So you want to be explicit about the one or two competitors that you're competing with most directly, the ones whose businesses look the most like yours in terms of size, target customer, pricing, business model. Talk explicitly about those. Talk about their prices, their offerings, and how you're different. Beyond that, if you have, if you can think of, 15 different competitors, don't list all 15. Talk about them in general buckets. You can say there are approximately X number of, let's say you're starting let's say you're starting a I'm trying to think of an example that isn't a real business that I've worked with recently. Let's say you're starting a music school, and you're going to teach, music, variety of instruments, vocal music, just general music school. So you might say, there are approximately, 15 different music schools across the greater Philadelphia area. 10 of them are exclusively offering lessons to, children and individuals under the age of 18. Only 5 also offer adult classes. We are most directly competing with those 5 because we also offer adult classes. Here's who they are. Here's what kinds of, we are different from these others because we offer multiple instruments, and these guys focus on, just guitar or just piano or just voice, whatever it is. But you can talk kind of in kind of generalized buckets about your competitors, unless there are specific ones that, if you're competing specifically with, like, Joe knows, for instance, Joe knows that he's definitely competing with Dunkin' and Starbucks and La Colombe. So he's talking about those. So Joe is brewing coffee at home is more affordable. He's competing with Dunkin' Donuts, which is more affordable than he is, but it's also lower quality. He's competing with Starbucks, which is consistent with no brewing method, which offers consistency, but doesn't have any kind of, which is limited on the number of brewing methods that they offer. La Colombe is high quality, but there isn't one nearby. His whole thing, if you remember from last week, is that he's a local, he's in a specific neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of coffee shops. But he also has, other independent coffee shops often use locally roasted beans, but they don't have that corporate service that he has. So that's a little bit more about the competition. The next section, differentiation, depending on your thing, you can combine in this way, and you can combine your differentiation into your competitive analysis section, but you can also break it out and do it separately. Differentiation is the piece where you're talking about how you are positioned in a relationship. Are you a higher end alternative? Are you an innovative approach? Are you, why are they going to choose you over your competition? So this is going to pull from the why you section of your one-page business plan. Here are some potential answers to the question, why you? It could be, that we're a savings. It could be where we have better branding. It could be we are going to help our customers reach their goals more effectively. It could be that we're better at problem solving. It could be that we're really offering a custom experience for our customers. It could be that you are less risky. It could be that you are have better customer service in some way. But what's the answer to that question, why you? What is it that you're competing on? Should you include aspirational competitors? Yes, you should include aspirational competitors, especially if there's somebody that is kind of part of your, I want to be like them someday. That's a great, way to kind of shorthand your long-term vision. So definitely include that in the competitive analysis. So the differentiation for Joe's differentiating themselves on the quality of beans, the variety of brewing methods, the expertise of the staff, the fact that they're exclusively local, the relationships with local businesses, food businesses or allied industries. And Joe, if you don't know, Joe is an expert in coffee. I think we showed you his resume before. Joe is a nationally renowned coffee expert. So we're really trading on Joe's knowledge of coffee. I better pick. Okay, moving through. All right, so this next section is marketing and sales. This is going to pull from the marketing and distribution channels and the resources and partners sections of your one-page plan. In the introduction to the marketing and sales section, you're going to talk about just a high-level overview of your marketing strategies, right? So this could be, we're going to have an online presence on Google. We're going to claim our Google listing. We're going to have a website. We're going to have social media. Talk about, during a startup phase, especially, we're going to utilize banners, flyers, and a sidewalk board to capture foot traffic. We're going to have social media marketing, especially on Facebook and Instagram. We're going to update this many times a week. Our content is going to be primarily image-based. We're going to promote specials. We're going to promote our shop's ambiance and other appealing visuals consistent with our branding. And then there's a section for branding. So that's going to come up, defining what the branding is. The next section is the customer profile. So this is the piece that we actually began with last week, right? It took us all this time to get to the customer profile, but it was the very first thing we talked about in our one pager, because it starts with, if you don't know who your customer is, it's very hard to sell to them. Your customer is not everyone, right? If you're trying to sell to everyone, you're going to have a really hard time. So you want to pull from this who section of your one pager and describe your target customer in detail. The reader should understand exactly who your product or service is designed for, demographics, beliefs, lifestyles, household size, income, age, maybe profession, maybe spending habits. You can use research tools like the census website to estimate the approximate number of these customers in your market if you can. But the more detailed you are here, the more targeted and therefore the more effective your marketing efforts will be. If you don't know what your customers' preferences are, ask them. Don't assume that you know what your customer wants. If your customer is like you and you base all of your marketing and product and service design choices on your preferences, you are only going to find customers who think exactly like you do. Whereas there may be somebody who is really interested in what you have to sell, but they're not going to know about it because they have slightly different preferences from you. So go ahead, identify the places where you're making assumptions based on your own preferences and find opportunities to challenge those assumptions. Find opportunities to talk to real people who fit into your target demographic and ask them concrete questions about their customer preferences. If you're starting a coffee business, go talk to somebody who drinks coffee every day and ask them, when was the last time you patronized a local coffee shop? What did you expect to pay? Were you satisfied with the experience? How did you find out about that coffee shop? Is there anything that you would change about that experience? Ask questions. What made you decide to buy coffee that day instead of another day? How often do you buy coffee outside the house? Things like that. Don't just assume that you know what your customer wants. This process is called customer validation, and it could not be more important. If you don't get the feedback at this stage, you'll get it after launch when people do or don't buy your product or service. Better to get it in the planning stage and tailor your product or service, directly to the target customer. So Joe's customer profile is neighbors who drink coffee daily. So that's residents over the age of 16 who live within a 10-mile walk of the location and drink coffee. Based on the census estimates, and the percentage of the US population that drinks coffee, we estimate that this is approximately 8,000 individuals. We're also targeting local businesses looking for coffee for meetings and we're using the database First Research, we identified 250 such businesses that have more than 2 employees located within the target area. So bam, that's our customer profile. We know who they are, we know what's important to them, and we know approximately how many of them there are within our reach. So now we know, our maximum kind of sales potential is how frequently those customers would shop times our prices, times that number of customers. That's the maximum amount of money that there's no amount of marketing budget that can get us higher than that. So that's a really good number to know. You'd have to expand into other neighborhoods to reach beyond these people. So sales and service, we talked about how this is we were going to revisit this later on, but you want to talk about your sales process. Are there platforms, apps, payment processing tools that you use? How do you provide customer service to your customers? If you have an e-commerce business and it's drop shipping or production on order, what are you going to do if a customer doesn't get a package but you didn't ship it? Do you know how you can resolve that customer service issue? What are your refund policies? If you have a service-based business where people schedule times with you, what's your cancellation policy? What's your intake process? Do you have waivers? Do you have do you have customer onboarding? If you have a B2B business, how are you finding leads? If you have, so all this process of how are you actually Now we know, our general marketing strategies and who we're trying to reach. Now, like brass tacks, how you go and reach them. So that's what this goes into the sales and service portion. For Joe, this is how Joe is making money. Retail coffee sales are paid for when they're ordered. There's a point of sale system. He accepts these kinds of payment methods. Bulk or corporate orders are invoiced upon delivery, and they must be paid for within 15 business days. Invoiced electronically, et cetera, et cetera. Joe also wants to talk about his branding. So branding is something that I think people often kind of dismiss sometimes as being less important, but really it's about what you value and represent to the public. How do you want to be known? So your brand isn't just, the colors in your logo. It's about what those colors represent and what they express about the values and mission of your business. Classic example, if you have a business that's, is kind of trading on, its sustainability or its, climate friendliness or something, classic choice for your color palette would be green or brown. If you have a business that's targeting, working with kids, you might have bright colors, primary colors. If you have a business that's, that you're positioning yourself as a very high-end alternative and your price point is higher than your competitors, but that's because of the quality, it's a luxurious experience, then your branding should convey, luxury and refinement and sophistication. Maybe your packaging is very substantial and feels nice to open. So your branding is all of those things. It's all those those intangibles that represent, the values of your business. So describe your brand. What do you value and represent? So for Joe, the business wants to be known as a source of quality coffee, a welcoming place to sit and enjoy it, and a part of the local community. So the business logo was designed using the services of a freelancer on Fiverr, and the brand values above will be at the heart of all social media posts. So that's Joe. The last section in this is the communications and PR section. So here we're thinking about what we know about our target customer. How will you communicate with current and potential customer? How will you share your business's story and your activities? Not every business plan needs a communications and PR section, but if you have, if you're working with directly with consumers, this is a good idea. So again, specifics, Facebook, Instagram posts will be made 2 or 3 times a week using low-cost tools like Canva and Buffer. That means that Joe and Jane aren't going to necessarily have to spend time every single day writing social media posts. They can queue them all up in advance and they'll be automatically released throughout the week. At their grand opening, they're going to send out press releases. Then it'll include quotes and images, as well as background information and details on the quality and sourcing of the coffee. Again, to push that brand identity of being local, sustainable, high quality, and then networking. One thing they don't necessarily tell you when you're starting a business is that the relationships are super important. Like the relationships that you have with key vendors or with key business organizations really matter. I see a raised hand. Unfortunately, I'm not able to unmute you, but you can drop your question in the Q&A or in the chat. So what relationships do you value for sharing stories, making connections, referring customers, being known and being seen? Often professional services firms will refer customers back and forth. If a customer inquires about your services, but your books are full, you're not accepting new clients, you might have a referral partner where you can refer them over to somebody else, and vice versa. You would expect that from your referral partner at another time, when busy seasons are reversed. It could be, you have, so this is going to be from the resources and partners section of your one-page business plan. Joe's, for example, looks like this. Joe is part of the local business association. They attend regional and national conferences and presentations. Joe is a member in several local and regional networking organizations. And they plan to increase their participation. If you were writing this out fully, you might talk about your plans to really, up your participation in those organizations, and that's going to help build the B2B side of the relationship that, of the business. So, you can tie these, you can talk about how these networking relationships matter in the context of the rest of the business. You might also talk about, for Joe, those local coffee beans, those locally roasted coffee beans, are very important to the success of his business. It's a key vendor. So he might talk about the relationship that how is he going to keep the relationships with the vendors, with those key vendors, positive, and be on the lookout for new up and coming, locally roasted sources of coffee beans, and any other of those kind of key relationships would go under networking. And next, financing. So this is the place where we're going to talk about the money. So this section is going to talk about how much startup capital that you need, how profitable will your business be and when, and how is your business going to be sustainable. So you're going to describe in this section in words what you're going to show in a separate set of financial projections that are going to be attached to your plan. We can help you put the financial projections together. So if you're staring at this plan and you're like, I have no idea how to build financial projections, that's fine. We can help you do that. Joe happens to know that he's going to have startup costs of about $60,000. You saw that startup budget way back, half a presentation ago. Let's say those total costs add up to 60 grand. He's got financial projections. He's got a statement of cash flow, profit and loss, a pro forma balance sheet, all those things that are part of the business loan application. And then he has a sources and uses of funds section that describes where those funds are going to come from, what portion are going to be owner investment versus outside capital, what kind of outside capital, et cetera, et cetera. So Joe and Jane have $30,000 in savings to invest in the project. They've raised an additional $15,000 from family investors, and they will seek a $15,000 business loan from a local micro lender. They're aiming for a 2-year loan so they can get that off the books as quick as possible. And that's their plan. So I know that everyone has questions probably about financing. So I'm gonna real quick add a quick poll to see if that's true. Do you plan to obtain outside financing? I'm not sure. No, I can self-fund. Yes, I'll need outside funds. Yes, I'll need outside funds within my first 2 years. Just talk a little bit about the what you know so far of your needs for outside financing. You may not know, and I'm not sure yet is a fine answer, so don't feel that you have to be confident in this answer right now. It may depend on a lot of things. A great question in the chat here about financial projections. So while you're all answering that question about financing, should projections exist in a perfect world, or should they include buffers for a slow summer because people have those contracts in August? You often see conservative and optimistic. You often see like two sets of financial projections. So you've got a conservative set and an optimistic set. Obviously you want to try to strike a balance and have like as close to what you really think is going to happen be reflected in the plan, but it's not unusual to see two different sets of projections, one that is best case and one that's worst case. But yeah, if you know that there's a seasonal variation in your business, you should have the seasonal variation reflected in the projections. I'm going to end the poll. Even split, I would say. So we'll go through everything. I'm going to pause real quick. Here are the basic options for financing. I'm going to play a video that I really like that I think explains financing super well. And I know that's you came in here to but trust me, I think this video will be helpful. So I'm going to do a quick share. I'm going to include sound. We're going to watch this quick video on financing. This is from the Kauffman Foundation.
Most young companies need money, which may or may not come as a big surprise, but they do. The number one source they get money from is from their own savings. Whether it's a few $100s or even thousands of dollars, that's what we tend to tap first. And a lot of companies don't get money from any other place. They get money from their own savings, and then after that, they're lucky enough to be cash flow positive. They're profitable. So we talk a lot as if all companies require all sorts of external capital, and the reality is that more than half of young companies get all their funding from a combination of founder savings and then cash flow from the business, and we're out of here. Next up on the list is another one that catches, I think, people by surprise, and that's credit cards. almost every young company you can think of, to one degree or another, was funded on credit card. And it is the single largest source of capital for young companies after founder savings. And then the next place where they tend to get money is from friends and family. After I've tapped out my credit card and I've used up all my savings, I turn to people I know and say, hey, will you help me? And that's the third biggest source of capital. And then the next place is banks. And the banks are a totally weird situation, because with banks, they get a lot of attention, but they actually fund very, very few young companies. But it's not their fault. You have to think about the way bank lending works and how shareholders want banks to lend. They want them to lend money against secured assets. And young companies don't have any security. They have nothing to secure it against. And the joke in the industry is you can get all the bank funding you want as a startup as long as you don't need it. And then the last piece is venture capitalists. They get the lion's share of the attention, which in some ways is warranted. You know, your Googles and Apples and FedExes and many others all have venture capital money inside of them. But the reality is, and this is from Kaufman research, less than 20% of the fastest growing companies in the United States took any venture money. And that's not because the VCs wouldn't give it to them. It's because they didn't want it or didn't need it, because they had all those other sources. I don't need money, and I certainly don't need money on these terms. Because, you know, venture capitalists, unlike banks, they don't lend against secured assets. They give you money in exchange for shares. So they take some of your company away. So my answer is if you don't need it, definitely don't get it. There's no question the venture industry has become staid. The irony is it's intended to fund disruption, and yet it's an industry that had become complacent. And interestingly, over the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen the emergence of other mechanisms for funding, like AngelList, like these kinds of peer-to-peer funding sources, as people increasingly provide capital in smaller amounts, but more people doing it directly. Having said all of that, though, venture capitalists are hugely important for those young companies that don't have access to bank money, but are growth companies. They have the prospect of being a $5 million or a $10 million company in a couple of years, and they need that growth capital to get there quickly. So it's a race. And the way you play the race is by getting money from people like venture capitalists who give you the money so you can compete with other people who are racing as fast as you are. If you can run a company off cash flow and some combination of credit card, your own savings, and friends and family, you know, Bob's your uncle. Run. You know, keep all the equity, because, you know, there's no better thing than being in full control of your own destiny.
All right, so that's a sort of a long version of this, or a short version of this section that I want to talk about next, which is financing options. What I like about that is that I think it addresses one of the biggest, some of the big misconceptions that I hear from folks around financing. But that your basic options are self-funding, loans, and there's a few different kinds of loans that we'll talk about, grants, crowdfunding, and equity investment. And we're going to go through these pieces and go, you know, pros and cons, and kind of eligibility requirements as we go along. So, so self-financing, advantages of self-financing, you know, big advantages: you are not in debt to anyone. You are in total control of the expenditures. You don't get, nobody else is determining how you can spend that money. You get to decide it yourself. And nobody runs a credit report on you. So if you have credit concerns, you know, self-funding is definitely, can be advantageous. Disadvantages, of course, you're limited to the amount of resources that you already have, right? If you don't have a money tree in your backyard, if you don't, you know, if you don't have a nest egg built up, if you haven't been saving for years for this business, you're limited to the money that you do have available to you. And so that can extend the planning stage as you're saving funds. It definitely can deplete your savings, those family savings and resources. And that can limit also the speed of your business growth. If you have limited access to capital because you're limited only to what you have, you may not be able to kind of grow as quickly as you might if you had access to you know, other forms of capital, because you're only going to be able to go through cash flow, through the revenue of the business. This is, as the you know, the video said, this is by far the most popular way to start businesses, because of the kind of the limitations of these other forms of capital. So moving on to other forms of capital, loans. There are multiple kinds of loans. Micro lending, is, I think the technical definition of microloans are loans under 50,000 are considered microloans. There's a body of a kind of lender called a micro lender. They're usually nonprofits or community-based lenders. They're typically designed to work with startup businesses or with existing businesses that have credit challenges that are kind of, for whatever reason, not of interest to the more traditional banks. They might work with somebody who has credit issues. They might work with a startup that can't fully collateralize the loan. They're kind of, they can be a little bit more willing to work with folks, but they're still going to have the same concerns around, profit potential and, repayment ability and personal credit and all those other things that, a banker would want to know about too. SBA loans are, a great resource. SBA loans don't actually come from the Small Business Administration. They come from other lenders, like a micro lender or a bank, but they are in whole or in part guaranteed by the SBA, meaning that the lender isn't taking on the full amount of risk of the loan. If you default on an SBA loan, you still face the same consequences in terms of your personal credit, or your business credit, but the SBA helps cushion that blow to the bank. They guarantee whatever portion of the loan you weren't able to pay in whole or in part, and the bank is made whole. So an SBA loan can be a good option for somebody who might not be a good candidate for a traditional loan, because the bank will be more willing to take on that risk because it's not as risky to them because the SBA is helping out. The downside to SBA loans is that SBA loans, because they're a little bit higher risk, they tend to have a little bit higher of an interest rate compared to traditional loans. So if you don't need to go for an SBA loan, you don't want to like opt into that because you're going to end up with a slightly higher interest rate. Interest rates are plenty high enough as it is. Traditional loans are, typically most available to businesses that have been around for a few years. If you have 3 years of cash flow records, you can pretty much, you can say with confidence to a bank, I expect to have a pretty similar cash flow in year 4 as I did in year 3, based on, the history of the business. And that can be really reassuring to a bank. They're much more likely to loan against that, those records than they are to loan against, financial projections or guesses. But, they're still going to have concerns around, how much debt is the business in already? What are the business's assets? How much is the business generating in revenue? What are its expenses? So what's its general profitability? All those kinds of questions are still going to come up with a traditional bank loan. And then of course there's lines of credit, which are basically like supercharged credit cards for your business. It's a body of money that you have access to when you need it, up to a certain limit. And if you repay it within a specific amount of time, there's no interest. If you don't, there's usually a pretty high rate of interest, similar to a credit card. So you might have like a 30-day revolving line of credit, up to $10,000. And so if you need, that's a great way to, if you're in a growth stage, and it's going to be a little while, you're hiring somebody and you need to be able to pay them for a little while as they're onboarding before they'll be actually able to generate revenue. A line of credit can be a great way to do that. And it's a great thing to have, kind of on standby, if you are an existing business. But again, you'll be less likely to have access to it as a startup. And the bank decides how much line of credit you get, not you. You can request, 300,000 line of credit, and the bank can say, I can do 20,000. It's a conversation often instead of just an application. Which for a traditional loan, you're typically applying for a specific amount, and that comes with a specific budget and use of funds. A line of credit is like, I think I'm good for this much. Can you just make that available to me if I need it? Grants, everybody likes to know about grants. Grants, of course, have lots of advantages. The money is free, you don't have to pay it back. There are many, many disadvantages, however. grants are usually quite competitive. So most grants by number are set aside for nonprofit organizations, charitable organizations. Where grants are available to for-profits, they tend to be very focused, and they're working with like a specific set of for-profit businesses for a specific kind of semi-charitable purpose. So it could be, a grant that a certain foundation is putting out to help local childcare businesses rebuild their playground. And there would be eligibility requirements, and you'd have to apply. Or it could be a grant that's set aside from a specific, charitable organization to help, struggling African American owned businesses in a specific commercial corridor. There's really focused requirements around grants usually, and there aren't as many as you might think. So, if you're going to rely on a grant for your startup funding, my recommendation would be to focus in on a specific, try to find a specific grant opportunity and understand, there are funding priorities and requirements. You typically don't set up, you typically don't get access to the same pot of money twice. If you get a grant one year, that's typically, the time that you got it, you can't go back and get the same grant the next year. And often also for-profit grants are usually small dollar amounts. It could be, $500 or $1,000 as opposed to a business loan, which could be $25, $50, $100,000. And they often have restrictions on the use of funds, and you usually have to report what you spent it on. So there's a lot of oversight. So grants are nice if you can get them and if you're eligible. I see some questions here. I'm going to come back to these in a minute, because I want to get through the last piece while we still have time. The last option is, of course, crowdfunding. You can use one of these crowdfunding platforms to raise funds from your community. There are some conditions for success, though. You need to have a robust social media network, right? Your crowdfunding campaign is only going to reach people that you can put the word out to. So you've got to have a good, you've got to be willing to spend a lot of time pushing that out. You've got to have a good hook. The best crowdfunding campaigns typically have videos, and you've got to have, good ask and, a realistic fundraising goal, good rewards for your funders, things like that. And it doesn't always work. So those are the 4 options. I'll take the questions in the chat now. Are there industry-specific legal experts who can warn about potential legal challenges and how to protect yourself? Yeah, so that's just called risk management. Insurance providers can talk about this a lot. You can find mentors who can tell you things about this. Typically, you're not going to necessarily talk to a lawyer about how to protect yourself like this. A lawyer can help you deal with a fallout if somebody were to sue you, but the lawyers typically get involved after things have already gone wrong. Before things go wrong, you're going to talk to insurance providers and industry experts like a mentor, a successful food business owner, a serve safe instructor in the case of the food related startup business. But I hope that helps. Typically, risk management would not necessarily be an attorney's purview. Is there any logic to setting up your business as a 501c3 in order to get access to more grant funding? In some cases, yes. The problem is whenever you have an interrelated for-profit and nonprofit, you have to be very careful about how the money flows back and forth between the two, because nonprofits have, there are laws about how nonprofits can disperse their assets. So you have to be sort of careful there. But yes, that can be a way to get access to more grant funding. Some grants won't let you contract out more than a certain amount of the grant to other entities. So there could be restrictions on the grant side for how all that works. But yeah, that can be workable in some instances. It depends, again, on the specifics. Last question here in the chat, and I'm just going to move forward to how to contact us. Where is the event on 3/15? Yes, you need to sign up to pitch. So you do want to, Rachel, you want to take that one? So I'm going to actually pull up our calendar of events. I'm going to just go ahead and pull that up so you can check it out. So if you go to our website, which is here, you can click view webinars and you see our full calendar of events. And March 15th, SBDC Day. This is the event. Question about format of the 15th and how do we get ready to pitch? I'm going to throw those.
If you want, I can take this one. So we're celebrating SBDC Day, which is a nationwide event where all of the small business development centers across the country are going to be celebrating the impact that small business development centers make in our communities. So for this event, it is going to be hosted at our Center City campus, the Temple Center City campus, which is right across from City Hall in Philadelphia. This is an in-person event. It begins at 5:30 and will run until 7:30. And you can come and practice your elevator pitch. We're looking at true elevator pitches. So these are more just talking about your business. They should be about a minute. They wouldn't exceed 3 minutes. And then you can get feedback from us, some of our bank partners, and then your peers, other small business owners. It's also a mixer. So if you're not interested in pitching, that's totally fine. You can just come for the networking and to see other businesses and how they're pitching. We would love for you to join us. Like Isabel said, you can register by going to our website and finding that view all upcoming webinars, and then you can just register there, and then it'll give you the option of choosing to register as just an attendee coming not to pitch or as a pitcher. And then we'll just ask, you'll get some feedback after that, some instructions on if you want to include slides, where to send them, etc. I also just want to take a moment. I put in the chat a link to our survey. You can also continue submitting questions while I'm going over this. But I also want you to take a moment. It's really quick. It's just 4 short questions just to give us feedback on this event. Not only does it help us improve and learn about other things that you might be interested in, but it's also required by our funder, the Small Business Administration, so that we can continue offering these no-cost workshops. We also have, like I mentioned, we have the elevator pitching and mix event on the 15th. We also have some other events coming up, including Canva, basics to digital marketing design. So if you're looking to learn how to use Canva for graphic design tools, making better business decisions with Google Analytics, and then further down the line, we even have some social media foundation classes. So feel free to take a look and register for anything that seems interesting. We'd love to see you there. I also want to take a moment and thank all of you for your participation. When you participate, it makes these a lot more fun. And also to Isabel for her great presentation. She's one of our best. So thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. There was one question in the Q&A about on SBDC Day, can we do videos, or if people want to show videos as part of their decks? I know we can do slide decks. I don't know about videos.
So because it really is a true elevator pitch.
So for some reason,
can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Perfect. So because it's really a true elevator pitch and we want to be able to accommodate as many pitchers as we can, we're really trying to stick to slides or just getting up and talking. If you have a video and it really does fall, if it's like just an elevator pitch video, we could consider it, but it really would still have to stay within that 1 minute time frame, just so that we can make sure that we allow time for everyone else.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. All right. I really enjoyed speaking to you all today, and you had some great questions, a really active chat, a great room. Let us know how we did with the survey link that Rachel shared. But yeah, pleasure to speak with you all, and I hope you will follow up and connect with us. Sign up for individual consulting if that's your jam, but look forward to working with some of you. A link to sign up to the, was that your question, Bella? A link to sign up for the event on the 15th?
So I just stuck that, stuck that in the chat. So if you want to sign up for that event, we'll have some snacks. We'd love for you guys to attend. That link is in the chat as well. And you can now just click on that and get ready to sign up, and we'd love to see you there.
Awesome. All right, we've gone a few minutes over. I want to be respectful of everybody's time and let everybody get back to your day, but do definitely let us know how we did. And I don't see any other questions, so I think we are good. was a pleasure. Have a good week, everybody.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Bye.